Good evening, everybody. Welcome to tonight's revision speaker series. Thank you very much for joining us from near and far. I'm Sarah Fayan. I'm the CEO of Guildhouse, and I'm really thrilled to participate in tonight's very important conversation. To start with, I would like to acknowledge that we are all meeting on the traditional lands of the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples, and I pay my respect to elders past, present, and emerging. I recognise and respect their cultural heritage, beliefs, and relationships with this special land, and I acknowledge that they are of continuing importance to all Aboriginal people living today. I'm coming from Kaurna country tonight, and thank you very much to everyone for joining us for this second session, specifically in partnership with Agency. The revision speaker series is something that Guildhouse is really proud of. It's something that's really special and significant and central to our program, and we're really pleased to share it with all of you. It's an online program, so it allows us to connect wide and far across the country and share magnificent content with you. All of these sessions are thoughtfully curated to help us all deepen our connections, strengthen our creative practice, and grow our skills. This is the second part of the series partnering with Agency, a values-centred organisation that exists to celebrate and promote Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander art, culture and people on a local, national and international scale. Thank you so much, Bronwyn Lobb, for being here tonight and for joining us and for working so closely with us. We're really delighted to contribute to your very special aspirations to develop and facilitate new platforms that promote and celebrate cultural maintenance and support Indigenous leadership to thrive. It's something that is very central to our agenda too, and we look forward to learning and growing in this space. Just before I introduce our very special speakers, I'd like to remind participants joining us tonight of a few housekeeping rules. I think you all have, and thank you. Please turn your microphones on to silent. Excuse me while I am just adjusting my notes here. You're very welcome and invited to post some questions in the chat, and those will be considered in the presentation. Please just be mindful that on Zoom everybody can see what you're posting, and we really are grateful for you being very respectful in that space. If you have any challenges with your technology, there's some notes in the chat space, or you are welcome to pick up the phone and give Guildhouse's landline a call, and my lovely colleague Polly will do her best to help you out. It's my very great pleasure now to welcome back and introduce Sebastian Goldspeak, Agency's curator, who'll lead tonight's conversation with very celebrated and important local artists, Tess Alice, Dennis Golding and Carmen Glyndburn. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm going to give just a 2-minute introduction, just one to celebrate who you all are, and for those of you who may not have had the opportunity to meet or hear from you before. Sebastian Goldspeak is an independent curator and proud descendants of the Barramuttagal people of Western Sydney. Since launching his artist-run space, Alaska Projects, as a platform for exhibiting contemporary art in unused and disused spaces, it's been wonderfully successful, and Sebastian has showcased over 500 artists across 150 exhibitions. Sebastian's widely curating exhibitions nationally and internationally, and we were really treated to his insight just last year in 2022 with his curation of the Adelaide Biennial of Australian Art for the Art Gallery of South Australia. Thank you. Tess Alice, it's wonderful to welcome you here tonight. Tess is an award-winning visual arts curator, researcher and writer specialising in contemporary Indigenous art. No doubt you will have heard of Tess, and she has worked in Indigenous cultural development since the early 1990s and has been engaged as a curator right across this country. Currently, no, just recently, Tess's major exhibition has just launched at the Wollongong Art Gallery, celebrating the 30th anniversary of the founding of the Kumadichi United Aboriginal Corporation. And we just heard two wonderful celebrations about that. Congratulations that Tess was just sharing with us. Over 740 people flocked to the launch of this important exhibition. And your emerging curator has been nominated for a wonderful local government award for the artwork that she's developed to project onto the gallery. So what amazing legacy you bring to us all. Thank you. Welcome, Dennis. Dennis Golding is an artist born and raised on Gadigal land. He works in a range of mixed media, including painting, video, photography, and installation. His practice is drawn from his own experiences, living in urban environments and through childhood memories. Thank you, Dennis. I understand you know that you're often looking and critiquing on the social, political, and cultural representations of race and identity, and we look forward to hearing more about that tonight. And welcome, Carmen Glyndburn. Carmen, I'm going to give this a go. Carmen is a Southern Aranda, Kadaditch, and Anamagera. I really hope I've got that right. Transdisciplinary artist who employs contemporary methods of capturing First Nations storytelling translated across many artistic mediums. She uses her practice as a platform to uplift, empower, and preserve these really important stories for many generations to come. Thank you. What a phenomenal group of people to listen to tonight. I won't make you wait any longer. Over to you, Sebastian, to lead us in conversation about country and Western, the making of First Nations public art. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sarah and Polly and everybody at Guildhouse and Bromlin and all the team at Agency for having us back here for this speaker series. Such an honour to be speaking into Kaurna country, to Tandanya, a place that's very kind of dear to my heart. I'm coming to you tonight from Gadigal land, from the Powerhouse, the offices of the Powerhouse here in Ultimo in downtown Sydney. And I'm super excited / nervous about tonight's conversation because I'm going to kick off by talking to the incredible Tess Ellis, someone who has always been a constant sort of source of inspiration to me, but also someone who's definitely always kind of kept me in check. And someone who, I always kind of look to. Hi, Tess, how are you? Tess, just double check that is your mic on there, Tess?
Yeah.
Tess, before we go in and speak to Carmen and Dennis, I thought I might start with you. And to me, that's logical for a number of reasons, which we'll get to, particularly around how you and Dennis and Carmen came to work together. When we were preparing for this talk, Tess was asking me, what kind of questions will you ask? And I said, I'd like to, Tess, start off by talking about your experiences from the 80s onwards to today. And she's like, the 80s? No, it's the 90s. It's the 90s. So sorry for putting that on you. But what's interesting is that the broad kind of focus of tonight is looking at public art and the kind of emergence and presence of public art from First Nations artists that we're seeing across the country. But Tess, I wanted to take you back to the 90s and to a different time, and to sort of, as a way of, I guess, sort of seeing where we are now compared to where we once were. Particularly in that kind of landscape and the opportunities that Aboriginal artists had to sort of make monumental work from that period. So maybe if you could tell us what were the 90s like?
Well, firstly, I'm coming to you from the home of some friends of mine on Dja Dja Wurrung country in Victoria. I'm just visiting for the night. What were the 90s like? The 90s was a different country, was a much better country, I think. But in terms of public art, it was, quite frankly, I think a simpler time, a time of learning and a time of getting things wrong. And I got things wrong all the time. But it was a time mostly for, as far as I understood it, Indigenous public art was mostly driven by local councils. This is in New South Wales anyway. And local councils, if they had a relationship with local Indigenous communities and Indigenous arts communities, would just go out and employ those people so there was no tender process. There was very little tender process. It was, this is what we want. This is, we know you can do it. So here's a pot of money, go and do it. And a lot of the times it was mural work. And it was, dotted dolphins or all sorts of interesting iconography. And some of us moved into creating three-dimensional works, or like there's a fountain. I sent you a photo of a fountain of local dreaming stories. And when I say local, I mean from my hometown of Wollongong and the Illawarra, so Dharawal and Wadi Wadi dreaming stories. And so the 90s was all about exploring country and how country was made and the mythology of country, rather than the stuff that we are seeing more and more now, which has much more of a political bent.
Yeah. And you talk a lot about sort of, during that time you experienced this incredible kind of conference that you worked on of sort of First Nations people from around the world. And it seems that experience was a really kind of formative experience for you, and it sort of connected you into indigeneity kind of globally, but also it seems to have really kind of opened your perspective on things. Do you mind talking a little bit about what that was and what that experience was like?
In 1993, I was working at TAFE running an Aboriginal women's course, and I got a call from Nerita Blair, who was the head of the conference secretariat of the Third World Indigenous Peoples Conference on Education, and it happened to be in my hometown of the Gong. And she asked if I'd go and work for her. And I said, yeah, I will, but I've got to finish my course first. And she said, no, I need you yesterday. So I went back to the women who I was working with in the course and said, I've been given this job opportunity. And they said, you have to take it. You have to take it. You have to leave us and take it. Even though the World Indigenous Peoples Conference, there was always a sunset to it, and then I'd be unemployed. But we had 7,000 delegates from around the world. It was before the internet was released upon us. So I don't know how we did it. Sometimes we'd have to come into the office at 4 a.m. so we could talk to, I don't know, Mexico or India or South Africa. I can't remember, but it was quite a time. And homing and housing 7,000 delegates in Wollongong was another challenge. But I also decided to do an exhibition. It wasn't on the conference plan. So I did an exhibition called From Desert to Coast at Wollongong Uni. The university was the host campus for the whole conference. So 7,000 people rocked up. Most of them were, of course, from Australia, but I ended up billeting 3 Canadians, one young woman. They were all from a theatre troupe from Saskatoon. One young woman, one I'm still friendly with, Bruce Sinclair, who's a playwright in Canada, and a guy called Don Freed, who was a singer and guitarist, and at that time was Joni Mitchell's boyfriend. So that was my claim to fame. Everything changed my life. Nerita Blair changed everything, the way I work, the way I do business. She was the best boss I ever had. Her only criteria was get the work done. If you did it in 5 minutes or 5 hours, get the work done. And consequently, we all worked really, really, really hard. And we could wear what we wanted. We could be who we were. We could have fun and laugh and carry on and be amazing happy workers, even though we were working on one of the most underfunded places on the planet for 7,000 people. Nerita made it the most incredible experience that shifted the way I did business from that point on.
And Tess, you mentioned that, you know, like this is sort of pre-internet, and it, you know, it's hard to imagine that time, but of course, you know, I remember that time as well. But being exposed to all these kind of voices, because, you know, when we're talking about sort of First Nations public art in Australia, of course, you know, we've seen this proliferate sort of around the world, you know, like, you know, different sort of cultures and the kind of rise of this, which is super interesting, you know, when we start to question, you know, monuments and colonial kind of monuments and the tearing down of them sort of coinciding with this kind of emergence. But it seems that experience really opened up a perspective to you beyond just sort of Wollongong, and, you know, looking not only nationally but globally as well. Yeah,
totally. I skipped Sydney and just went straight international, like, basically, because the world came to my hometown. I had the world in my house. You know, people from, I even remember their only Hawaiian delegates' names. They were Peter and Lynn Hanno. Yeah, and they were in my house, and they, like, seriously, the world came to us and invited us workers back to them. So if we could, we took up the challenge, and I did, and I moved to Canada for only a couple of months, but learned a lot. Was put my son in a native high school there. Became part of, emerged myself into the community there. Learned different ways of raising children, different ways of making art, different ways of respecting elders, different ways of doing all sorts of things, different ways of teaching, and brought that experience. Every experience is embedded within you. So of course I brought that home. Some didn't work, you know, I didn't bring everything and make everybody do the way they do it in Canada, but I embodied some of that and brought some of those emotions and feelings back with me. Even let my son leave school because he just went to the best school on the planet, and then he had to go back to a high school that didn't care about indigeneity or Indigenous anything, and just worried about how many days off he'd had. So yeah, so it was a different time, a different feeling. Like I said, the 90s is a different country.
And you mentioned education a few times there, and that's something you know, at the core of your kind of practice, I believe, is this sort of, you know, this reciprocal kind of thing of like giving back and studying and helping to educate, which is a great segue in to introduce Dennis and Carmen, because for me, your practice is always kind of rooted in people and place. You know, it's always honoring place, but it's honoring it through the connections, and the way that you do business is very much people based, and you know, looking at communities, looking at individuals, and kind of honoring their stories. Dennis and Carmen, hello to you guys.
Hello.
Hey, Carmen. Hey, Dennis, can you hear us okay?
Yeah. Can you see me?
Yeah, we can see you. So handsome, very handsome man. Yeah, one thing that might be a great kind of starting point is to talk about, before we talk about how you came to kind of work with each other, Dennis and Carmen, is about your kind of experiences of studying and kind of working with Tess as well too.
Tess was our uni mum. So she created this really like a sanctuary for Indigenous students, but students from all backgrounds. And I know for myself, I was having a really hard time making that transition from Central Australia, coming back to uni. I just got divorced and I'd enrolled myself into art school. She made a safe space for me, and I think a lot of other students, which is that type of support was imperative to succeed in them types of institutions. Yeah, I'm pretty sure Dennis agrees.
And how early, Carmen, did you at uni meet Dennis? Like, was that like something that happened pretty early on in the journey, or?
Yeah, we met by chance. Dennis was actually started a year before me, and we'd met by chance in actually something that Tess organised, like a Indigenous student lunch. And then we didn't connect again until another 3 years later when our degree had ended up linking up at the same time. We ended up doing honours together.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I remember working in the Indigenous programs unit and making that decision to go to art school. And then came that first year when we were doing talks. And it wasn't, I think, till second year when I first met Carmen, when I was, brought as a second year student to do a talk or to share some knowledge with our first year cohort. And I think that's the very first time I met you, hey Carmen, when you were part of that first year open day program. But then, yeah, as you mentioned, we connected through Tess, really creating that community and environment, which is so important for us students. Working in the Indigenous programs as student services support, it's much needed for our communities and for our students, because we all come from communities in all different parts around the country where university can be so daunting and such an experience that's changing, that we really needed to have our support system. And that's what Tess really created for us, of that support network and opportunities to connect with other students and peers. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's interesting because, both yourself, Dennis, and Carmen, a background of growing up in Sydney, but, family roots from other country, coming in together and sort of navigating, I guess, cultural kind of difference within Sydney, and being, intrinsically kind of part of the community, particularly the Redfern Waterloo community, very strong kind of community, but I guess sort of finding each other at university. And this, one thing that's interesting about all of you is you have like very multi-dimensional kind of practices, but one kind of key thing that brings you and Carmen together, Dennis, is the Rewrite Collective, which is a collective that you guys to work with each other. Do you want to talk a little bit about how the Rewrite Collective sort of came into being?
Yeah. Just noting as well, Carmen and I, we kind of grew up around the same community. I grew up in Redfern. Carmen grew up in Glebe and Annandale, but went to Cleveland Street High, which was where many students went to. But we hadn't met all through our teenage years around the same community and having the same friends and knowing the same people around. So it was with uni when we started to think about, how come I haven't met you before? Like we know the same people, and having these yarns about,
we had the same community basically of friends. Like there were
did.
so many mutual connections, and just never had cross paths until we both decided on art.
Yep. That's what really connected us, and we really held on to that. And as Carmen mentioned before, in third year in our honours cohort, we were clustered into the same studio space. So that's where we really brought a lot of our, our connections and our support systems, and really understanding that this is what we need and this is what we love to do and share. Because through school, we were encouraged to do group critiques and support, to give feedback on each other's practice as we keep developing as students. And we just really leaned off each other and supported each other in a way that was quite different to other students in our cohort. And we were given opportunities, and that's when we applied for our first residency after we graduated at Artspace. And that's how we started to form a collective, and we worked with other students as well, other graduates, where we moved there together. But through that residency, we really found this collective forming of Rewrite Collective, and how each of our works and our practices often talk about these, similar themes, but from our own, family history and lived experiences.
I think it's really about just providing a safe space for one another. And it was just based on friendship, and we were lucky enough that people were interested in what we were making straight out of art school. So we went from doing uni assessments being straight into, huge huge institutions and public artworks and things like that. So we needed to reenact that safe space of just making mistakes in private and leaning on each other. And it was reenacting sort of that space that Tess created at uni, where it was just safe. It was safe, and yeah.
And both of you guys, in reference to kind of public art, I guess, like, growing up around the Redfern area, you have some great examples of kind of Aboriginal public art that are not necessarily these kind of, sponsored kind of huge, you have very kind of like street level things like murals, like the enormous, Aboriginal flag mural there on Everleigh Street and things like that. These kind of public reminders of place, and that's something that Redfern and even into Glebe as well too, has present sort of growing up around that. When you guys started to think about making works in public on a larger scale, particularly transitioning from making sort of works in a studio for galleries, what was that process like?
I think one thing that I noticed from a very young age about urban space and art in urban space is that it was reaching Aboriginal people. Gallery spaces with Aboriginal people aren't coming into gallery spaces. They do now and again, but we needed to make things that reached our communities and that people would see on a regular basis, and that were connected directly to that space, that were very much site specific. Yeah,
like with the growing up in Redfern, my uncle and my grandmother lived right across the road from the old Tony Mundine gym where the mural was. If I can remember anything, it was that so many community members who weren't living in the block would come up top or on the paddocks and take images. So it was this very iconic space for where community just felt connected. And that was what I really reflect on is showing their representation and showing their visibility in community where they feel safe to celebrate art and to celebrate community.
Yeah, and just that pride, like maybe it's someone's birthday and they get their photo taken in front of it, or whatever, that sort of proximity to that kind of very powerful and arresting kind of image.
Yeah, it was kind of this non-official Yabun festival experience where you go to Victoria Park, but everyone will be stopping in the block to take the photo, a hero shot in front of the large mural there. So
yeah, it was an incredible mural, because it also too perfectly sort of framed Sydney in the background, and it was this kind of reminder of this place. And I guess, like, not to put too fine a point on it, but a lot of this kind of energy of you guys working towards these public kind of outcomes was in some ways kind of engineered by Tess and supported by Tess, and seeing that sort of that kind of potentiality in you. Tess, I wanted to ask about that, because that's one sort of cornerstone of a lot of your practice is this thing of working with communities, but in a really kind of authentic way. What are some of the key things that you kind of try to approach in your work? Like, what are some of the things that are important to you when you start a new project? It could be a project in Wollongong, or it could be somewhere else. What's important to you?
If it's a project about the community, then the most important thing is to have the community backing. If you don't have the community backing, no matter how good the exhibition or the artwork will be, it will fail. So, for instance, when I did with Secrecy and Dispatch at Campbelltown Arts Centre, we formed a curatorium. So with Secrecy and Dispatch, for those who don't know, was to commemorate the 200th anniversary of the Appin massacre, which was the first government-sanctioned massacre. And if I had the community with me in that of a survivor, a descendant of a survivor of the massacre, the local sister, the nun who works at the local reconciliation group. I had local Aboriginal people from the Lands Council, from council, from all sorts of places as part of the curatorium, and we spoke to them about our findings. We took advice from them about what they wanted, and from that point on, we created the award-winning exhibition that you see in front of you now. Thanks, Sebastian. That's incredible. You did that. Without the local community, if they don't want you, you can't do it. If you have a history with them, like I do with these women you can see in front of you now, I have a history that goes back 100 years. So my ancestors, with their ancestors, that history is, Esme, that history is really important. I bring history with me I brought history with me to that particular exhibition, Connected History. So that was a really easy one to do. With Secrecy and Dispatch was a different story altogether. I had to prove myself. I had to show them who I was. I had to constantly assure them that, I'm an amazing curator. I had to show them I was listening, and they had to learn that I was listening by what I was doing. Whereas the Kumadichi artists, I didn't have to establish that. They already knew, even if they looked at me like I wasn't listening, they knew I was. We have a history that goes back, across the generations.
Yeah, and there was a beautiful image there of Auntie Esme Timbrey, and such an incredible legacy, but also too, like, it must be this sort of strange feeling of kind of like this direct kind of connection to the past and practices from the past, and seeing that still sort of embodied in her today and her children and things like this. But this incredible kind of history of the shell work and of place, and that's one thing that I always see navigate is those kind of personal things, and looking at the sort of personal positions that people are coming through. And I know that during the pandemic, you devoted a lot of your time to sort of looking after the older kind of people in your community, the older kind of artists who were kind of isolated there. So someone like Auntie Esme, like that kind of process of working with her, someone who works small, like with shells and this kind of incredible kind of detail. And to anyone listening, if you're not familiar with Auntie Esme's works, absolutely incredible artist. What's that process like of starting with something small and then enlarging that, I guess, in public works?
Well, that work that you showed, I don't know if you can show it again and just stop on it. So Esme's a shell worker, and she works with the tiny little shells, and her favorite ones are called starries because they're shaped like a star. There's Esme there with her opera house. I'll be showing that again in a couple of months' time. But can we go to that other one, the really big one?
Yep, this one.
And keep going.
Sorry, I'm bad on the PDF.
Yeah, that's okay. So from the tiny little shell works that she makes to not that one. That's a Kumadichi one. This one.
Sorry.
Next one. The coloured one.
Yeah.
That one. That one's 380 metres, when we believe it may be the biggest by meterage public art in Australia. If maybe, we're not sure if it's the biggest Aboriginal public art or public art in terms of square meterage, but it's a ventilation shaft for a new WestConnex M5, M4, M8, one of those M's of freeway systems. But we looked at, I worked with Esme and Cultural Capital and Esme's daughter Marilyn, but primarily all the knowledge that I know of Esme is in this work. The colors she chooses when she puts the fabric on her physical forms, her 3D opera houses and harbour bridges and boomerangs. The starries, you can see the starry shape, perforated shapes, the perforated holes in the metal is the starries, the sand and the sea, the colours of the sand and the sea. And down below at the very bottom, you can see like an S shape. That's a Bidjigal design that her nephew, Laddie Timbry, who was actually dying at the time we were working on this, he used to burn that design in over and over again into his boomerangs and shields and spoons and tourist objects. And so we brought this whole Bidjigal history into this massive thing, massive piece of public art that came from my intimate knowledge of the small little shell-worked harbour bridges and little booties things that she makes. So that's in a nutshell what that is all about, that work, translating from the tiny, the micro, into one of the biggest public artworks in the country.
Wow, it's an incredible thing and an incredible history, an incredible kind of legacy to celebrate. Dennis and Carmen, I wanted to ask you, sort of following on from the sort of, talking about the kind of monumental and this enormous kind of scale. One thing that you guys have been involved in and sort of, I would say like at the forefront of is also working digitally. So working with, digital kind of artworks as well too. And I guess perhaps in some ways coming up against that sort of, something that surrounds Aboriginal practice a lot of times is this kind of this sort of spectre of authenticity, or that it's related to traditional kind of modes of production. And then there's a couple of smart people like yourselves working kind of digitally and working in different forms. Can you talk a little bit about your experiences of working in the digital and even the digital in the public realm?
Yeah. Well, like, going off what Tess mentioned about, that relationship she built with Aunty Esme Timbry was the most important part of these types of projects of presenting public artworks and really creating great, and significant ones, just as special as this one, because that's really the goal of, these projects, is that relationship that you have and the conversations that you have over time with these people is what influences and inspires the artwork. I think what Carmen and I have really brought with our collaboration and what we do is our skill set working in graphic design, working in illustration and drawing. We're able to kind of work across the table through a collaborative process of picking out certain motifs and imageries. And maybe as an example, this could go into maybe, Sebastian, if you wanted to show the PDF that was sent of the Sydney Gateway project. We can talk a little bit more about that because it explains where we started with the small drawings and the images of the traditional weaving objects that was created by Aunty Phyllis Stewart. We also, this was the Sydney Gateway project, so a large-scale public art program across Sydney Airport. If you're going to Sydney Airport now, you could start to see these structures starting to build of the bridge and the retaining walls. But through our first engagements was basically to meet with Uncle Stephen Russell and Aunty Phyllis Stewart. We were invited, and Tess came along and facilitated this meeting to sit with them. If you go to the third page, Sebastian, we can talk a little bit more about the process. But that top image on the left side there is that first engagement we had, which was so special. We sat at the table, Aunty and Uncle were showing their objects and the weaving. Yeah, and it was just a really great way of understanding where can we start through this whole collaboration process and what are some of the images we can create from these engagements. So they're showing the mullet run here through this installation. And on the table, you can see one of Aunty Phyllis's work. And understanding that process of weaving, starting from a coil. And you can see down the bottom on that, where that pink comes out, we started to look at the patterning that starts to form there from the coil of weaving. And then we tried to relate this to what our conversations led to, you know, with Lapa, connections to La Perouse, connections to Uncle Stephen Russell's practice of creating nawis, so the canoes, and they start to form this similar shape that you can see from the weaving and from the canoe, and from the mullet as well, that you can also see what Arnie and Uncle are showing there. So through our design and through our drawing, we've started to look more about the shape and the form of what's created here through these engagements that we've had, and tried to create them in a way, and if you go up to the first page again, how we've started to integrate these symbols and these images across the viaduct screens, which this is called. So the large bridge that's now building in front of the Sydney departures area. You can start to see this form. And then in the next page, we're kind of working a lot more larger on an earthbound. And this is the one based in Tempe. Yeah. So we really understand, you know, those conversations and the relation that we built with Uncle Stephen and Auntie Phyllis is, what's the image? How can we relate that to country? And how can we integrate this throughout the infrastructure? Yeah.
And also just make impact. Like, it was consideration of place, not just because they had, you know, their bloodlines are from there, but also it's a significant space because it nears the first point of contact. So how do we, as young emerging practitioners, assist elders and knowledge holders to bring this on mass scale and, you know, assist them to make an impact and preserve this story?
Yeah, which must just feel like an incredible kind of responsibility, you know. And this is the thing that this kind of work is transcending like visual arts, right? You know, this is about the sort of preservation of culture and history. I mean, looking at that very kind of strong, very fierce community of La Perouse and the centrality of the mullet and the whale and all of those kind of motifs and the shell work and boomerangs and all of this stuff that we associate with La Perouse, this very kind of important place, to have that kind of responsibility as young people to be involved in telling that story sort of definitely transcends, you know, just making, you know, a pretty kind of artwork. You know, it becomes about this kind of history. And the weird thing as well too, I mean, you guys are young, but you know, some of these works that you will make will potentially outlive you, you know, like that they will be on for other kind of generations. And I always think that must be, yeah, an incredible feeling of responsibility. You also sort of mentioned that kind of thing of the sort of internationalism and people's first kind of view of place and of country, and that representation of Aboriginal culture, which is something that we talked about last week as well. And maybe this is, you know, I'm guilty as a rugby fan, but I thought I might have mentioned as well too, like the diversity of kind of projects you're involved in. Dennis, I always find it amazing that you know, you were involved you designed the Wallabies jersey, the first kind of Wallabies jersey celebrating First Nations kind of culture. So that's an incredible responsibility for a young person to shoulder.
Yeah. It comes from those conversations that we have as well, with how can we approach a design or an artwork that's based on history and place. And like the Wallabies jersey, I remember speaking to the Ella brothers, you know, Uncle Mark, Uncle Glenn and Gary, about that history of the very first Indigenous Wallabies player set back in the 1950s or 60s, when this person had to hide part of his identity to have this opportunity to play in this game. So relating, you know, these designs and these opportunities to work, you know, with whichever field, it's about really connecting history with place and also contemporary experiences as well. So that work that was made for the Wallabies jersey was it was really interesting, and about that conversation with the Ella brothers to talk about that history as well. So it was an educational outcome.
Yeah, which once again goes back to the streets of La Perouse, and how they revolutionized that game through the way that they played and represented their people. So an incredible thing. Tess, as a certified art mum to Carmen and Dennis, you must be filled with pride to see these young people working in the sphere and carrying on those kind of ideas and methodologies that you first helped them out with.
Yeah, I can't believe it. I'm so proud of them. I don't know how more proud I can be. Like, I'm bursting here. And I think we've only just begun scratching the surface with these two. They have so much more that they're embodied within them, so much more to tell us and to teach us. The small part I played, and it was lovely hearing Carmen talk about the safe space that was once my office, that no longer exists, but that small, tiny, safe space, to then recommending them for little gigs here and there to big major projects that I know they can take on. Now they're on their way. They don't need Art Mum anymore, although I'm always there for them. But I am so proud of them, and I cannot wait to see what they do next and what I can learn from them.
Amazing. We might just have a quick pause to ask for any questions in the chat. You don't have to ask questions, but if anyone's got any burning questions, feel free to put them through in the chat, and I can pass them on to the team here. I guess a good kind of question. We've tracked this kind of period of time from the 90s through to now, and this kind of evolution and this proliferation. I had a great conversation with Tony Albert a couple of years ago about his work on the War Memorial in Sydney's Hyde Park, which I think at the time was the first kind of war memorial to Aboriginal service people in Australia. And his sort of the feelings of responsibility that he had to represent Aboriginal service in the military, and thankfully, now we've seen more monuments kind of follow suit, and this is hopefully a continued kind of recognition of that service. But I thought it might be a good question for you, Tess. I mean, what's your kind of hope for the future around public art from First Nations artists, and what are some sort of the both the sort of opportunities that you would like to see, but also kind of potentially the impacts that you would like to see through this type of work?
The opportunities I'd like to see are just believing in the talent that we have, and more direct commissions. You know that, Sebastian. I'm all about direct commissions. And what those people, if we put faith in those people, they will give us back so much information and so much more. We can educate the public and educate each other in ways we never thought we could possibly do. And I think public art does that really, really well, and has the potential to do that really even better. Monumental work, I'm here or there on. I'm not that fussed on it. It can be amazing. And when I think about monumental work, I think about statues and things like that. So I'm not like, I'm not that enamored by statues, although some I think are great, but they are what they are. I love the work that you can walk past it 100 times and then suddenly you see the message. Yeah. And that has a kind of mysticism and magic. And I love when that happens, and then you understand the process of the artist's brain, the creator's brain, because you have gone on a journey with them, and it could be for a year, or it could be for just 1 week, and you get it, and you become embedded within that process yourself. So that's what I like. That's what I hope we have in the future.
And Carmen, do you spend any time thinking about kind of dream projects, like a dream kind of project that you would like to realize?
To be honest, some of them are already in process. So yeah, I always had the sort of little dream of maybe one day getting a commission in public art, and it's actually become my career at the moment. So yeah, I have a lot of stuff in progress that I probably would have dreamed about 3 years ago. So I'm really happy to say that.
Yeah, and it's amazing to think about that kind of legacy that, you know, you could create something and then, you know, some you know, young girl's going to walk past that, and that's going to, you know, spur on the kind of like next generation of dreams, you know, in relation to that.
Yeah.
What about you, Dennis? Not maybe in terms of works, but what about places? Like, are there any kind of dream places where you would like to you know, make a work?
I guess what's been a dream and that we've achieved so far in both Carmen and my works, we're always looking at ways to collaborate more and connect more. And in certain some proposals, there hasn't been a requirement where the artist has to do a form of engagement, whether it's with youth or elders. And we've actually used this to in our applications to say this is what we'd like to do, because we understand that a lot of the stories that come from community and come from our youth is what will come through and what is best shared through the public artwork or through the program. And I think that's been very successful in our works of not just in public art, but creative programming. And so Carmen and I co-produced the Sydney New Year's Calling Country Fireworks program. So that was a really great place for us to kind of see our artworks in some of the most iconic structures in this city, such as the Sydney Harbour Bridge. So that was such a dream to see that, in a beautiful moment that we shared with everyone, including the 100 Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander kids who we worked with from across the city, western suburbs to east and south. So yeah, I feel like we're really reaching our goals and our you know, our plans to work more with community. And I think when thinking of place, we're more so thinking about which community we can connect with.
Yeah, I mean, the New Year's Eve thing was crazy. Like when you guys told me about it, I was like, what? You know, like, yeah, but this is the this is the kind of the kind of area you've got to. It's actually a great segue, and there's a really good question from Bronwyn, which is asking about this connection back to kids and sort of incorporating kind of public art in the curriculum and as a teaching method, as a way of connecting, you know, all kids, First Nations or not, to these stories, the kind of place in these stories of country, because it's a great, you know, it's a great kind of visual representation for people to look at. And I know that that's something, this kind of idea of pedagogy is something that you know, you got through teaching from Tess, and it's something that you guys have continued on. It's something that I know is very important to you. Dennis and I were fortunate enough to collaborate together on the Adelaide Biennial, and Dennis did incredible kind of work, a series of works for that show, but also to headed up the sort of education space, and which was this incredible kind of workshop of superhero capes, making superhero capes for the students. And it was always really kind of heartening to see, you know, these little students kind of walking around the gallery in their capes and their kind of pride in it, which goes back to this, you know, to the autobiographical for you, Dennis, you know, childhood and sort of dress ups and this superhero thing, but also kind of pride, you know, pride in where you come from and your place. Do you get a lot of kind of joy and energy from those collaborations and seeing the impact within communities, particularly with young people?
Yeah, definitely. We say that come across a lot of the programs that we we've done. You know, and like you said, there's a sense of pride when we do work with young people. It's about really bringing that and helping them understand more about their culture and more about their identity. But also now, Carmen and I are in a great position where we can offer these mentoring roles to show these young people that you can achieve your dreams and you can do, you know, these amazing things, and we're a result of that, and the support that we've had with Tess and our, you know, art school training and our support system, we're really kind of showing it and wanting to give back to our youth and to inspire them and you know, and work with them in future projects.
To pay it forward. Another great question actually that comes off your statement, Carmen, about, you know, the importance of kind of safe kind of cultural spaces. Maybe it's a good question for you, Tess. The question is about how do institutions, you know, how can institutions help in creating safe spaces for First Nations artists and curators to make work and you know, make them feel supported in that practice?
Art institutions, they should actually, I'm going to be very controversial here, enact the mission statements that they put up on their websites about how great they are. If they enact those, the safe spaces will probably come. It's no good just saying that, you know, they honor First Nations people and they want to build First Nations relationships, but if they don't enact it, the generation below them will see that there's nothing inside that institution for them except a bland mission statement on a website.
Yeah, amazing. Dennis and Carmen, yeah, how do you feel about that as you know, as practitioners who work both, you know, a lot in the public realm and also in the you know, the corporate realm, but also too in the institutional realm as well?
I think, you know, when we're around the tables, it's really about listening and really taking in what is being shared through these conversations, and providing that space and the platform to be able to share those in a safe way, you know, and giving our communities more agency, power and control of what narratives they'd like to share. Yeah, rather than, I guess, kind of asking them what they should do, but what can we do? Yeah.
Just making those spaces safe enough for community to come in where they're not feeling like it's an elite space. Like really pushed into public art because we wanted to make art accessible. And also I think it's important that people who are working in institutions do speak up. I've been in a few situations where that hasn't happened and the culture kind of continues.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's intimidating to do so, but you know, it's easier to leave sometimes.
Yeah, I guess baseline respect, and yeah, not calling First Nations artists 3 days before NAIDOC week, and you know, expecting, yeah, you know, like yeah, being year round kind of interested in First Nations art, and you know, as Tess sort of said, like honoring whatever you put in your up plan or your institution's kind of mission statement. And do you guys have any kind of closing thoughts or any kind of burning issues that you want to bring up, Tess or Carmen or Dennis? Well, it's been an absolute joy talking to you, and I feel proud to know you all. And you know, I'm really excited for the future, and I'm really excited for how things will progress, and I'm really excited to see how you all kind of navigate your projects. I encourage you, if you're near the Wollongong area, to go down and see Tess's incredible show. Dennis has a show right now at the at Powerhouse as part of from World Pride. Carmen, have you got anything on right at the moment?
Not at the moment, no. Yeah.
Besides 45 million public artworks.
Public artworks. Yeah. You can go to Sydney Football Stadium and see an animation.
That's right. Yeah.
You just got to buy a Rabbitohs ticket to get in there.
Incredible artworks. Yeah, thank you so much also to once again to Guildhouse and Agency, and for you all for listening to the conversation tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Sebastian. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, everybody. I just want, on behalf of Guildhouse and all the participants, thank you so much to Agency, and most importantly to Sebastian, Tess, Dennis and Carmen. That was delightful, insightful, rich, and a real privilege to hear from you. I'm so glad that we'll be able to continue to keep this as a resource and share it with as widely as we can for people to contribute and understand and support public art and respectful connections and the celebration and the understanding of community. Thank you again to everyone for joining us for this revision series, and we look forward to connecting with you again in the future. Have a lovely evening. Bye-bye.
Thanks.